This is Decision 2006, a conversation with the candidates on KSL 5 Eyewitness News.
Good evening and welcome to this first installment of Decision 2006, a conversation with the candidates. Election Day is 2 weeks away. This evening, the candidates for Congress from Utah's 3rd District are in our studio. The 3rd District encompasses mainly central Utah, plus the southwestern portion of Salt Lake County. I thought we'd see a map, but there you see the candidates, and there's the map. Republican Chris Cannon is the 5-term incumbent. Democrat Christian Burridge is the challenger. Gentlemen, welcome. Glad to have you here this evening.
Thank you.
We've promised the candidates an opening statement, and as a result of a coin toss, Mr. Burridge, would you speak first, please?
Sure. My name is Christian Burridge, and I'm running for United States Congress in Utah's 3rd Congressional District. I thank you tonight for inviting us, and I thank my opponent for being with us today. I grew up right here in Utah. I went to local public schools, and I was educated at Snow College, and I got a law degree from BYU's J. Reuben Clark Law School. Right now, my family and I reside in South Jordan, and I am a consumer rights attorney with a law practice in West Jordan, Utah. I'm proud to be running for United States Congress because our country faces many issues that are challenges for us that we need to overcome. I feel that our country is moving in the wrong direction and that we need change in Washington. We also have many local issues that are affected by the federal government that people are crying out to be heard on. Some of those range from reform in the No Child Left Behind Act to getting more transportation dollars for our infrastructure here in Utah. And also, people are quite concerned about the issues of immigration. I hope tonight that we will be able to examine these issues and determine who is best to represent Utah's 3rd Congressional District. This district is the youngest district in the United States and has the most kids out of any other congressional district. I feel that I best represent the people of this district, and I will fight hard to work for Utah if I'm lucky enough to be elected to Congress.
Thank you, Christian Burridge. Mr. Cannon.
Thank you, Bruce. It's a pleasure to be here. I want to thank KSL for doing this, and frankly, I appreciate Christian's opening statement because that is pretty much, I think it's important about where we are in the state of Utah. You know, my district has more children than any other district in the country, and 3 times as many children as Nancy Pelosi has in her San Francisco district. That's important because in Utah we have some particular challenges that are big challenges. In the first place, 2/3 of our state is federal land, and so here in Utah we tax, as do most western states, at a much higher rate than they tax in the east, where they have all of their land available for the base for their funding of schools. And at the same time, we have large families and families that are marrying young and having children early, and so we have hundreds of thousands of kids over the next 10 or 20 years, as far as the eye can see, frankly, coming into our schools. And the question is, how are we going to fund that? And the answer is we have pretty limited resources. We have a federal government that gives us money, but demands that we do things their way, and that costs a great deal of money. I was out of Bingham High School today talking about that, and frankly, it's a problem to have the federal government meddling in our lives. On the other hand, we have all this federal land, and we have school trust lands that are dispersed among those federal lands, and if we don't consolidate those and get value out of them, we don't get value there. And so I've already done a couple of trust land consolidations that have given our schools a huge increase in budget, and we need to do that. That's the most important thing we can do in the federal level to actually make money available for our students. So I hope our listeners will send me back to Washington, D.C. so we can continue to do those sorts of things.
Thank you both for opening statements. The political pundits are framing the election this year as a referendum on the Bush administration, a referendum on Republican congressional leadership, a referendum on the war in Iraq, a referendum on incumbents. Mr. Burridge, is it a referendum on any of those things?
Sure.
Which?
I think people are ready for change in our country. With regard to many of the scandals and the overspending in the Congress, and the fact that people feel out of touch with their representatives, I think people are deciding that the Republicans in power at this time have had their turn, and there's been a lot of drastic influences in people's lives because of those decisions. I'm a consumer rights attorney. I see people's finances every day, and I see people that are suffering because of the attack on the middle class, where people are more and more being taxed on a payroll and less other revenue sources are coming in. And at the same time, people's wages aren't covering as much as they did before. I feel that we need somebody to go back to Washington and represent the people and their concerns and not necessarily all of the influences by the special interests and Washington insiders.
What do you think motivates voters this time, Mr. Cannon?
This is one of the most difficult elections in history. And of course, different parts of the country have different views. I think that a referendum in Utah on the president is probably not a bad thing. On the other hand, it's very clear that the Republicans may lose control of Congress this cycle. That means Nancy Pelosi is Speaker, Henry Waxman is the chairman of the Government Reform and Oversight Committee. I don't know how anybody's going to get any legislation done if they actually take over Congress. And we're in a time when actually we have really a very cool environment. We have lots of things that need to be done that aren't partisan. And if the Democrats take over and replace the things that are important in America with partisanship, that'll be a great loss for America. And yet you have John Conyers and Charlie Rangel talking about impeaching the president, talking about rethinking how we actually run the war in Iraq and what we're doing in Afghanistan and in the rest of the war on terror. I think that that's a depressing idea. I think John McCain the other day said that if the Democrats took over, he'd commit suicide. That may be a little extreme, but it's a little depressing to think about that.
You think the Republicans don't play politics in Congress?
Us?
Well, you just said the Democrats did, as if that were a negative.
If the Democrats take over, I think they've made it clear that they're going to try and impeach the president. They're not going to renew the tax cuts. And frankly, they're probably not going to get any legislation done with the focus on diminishing this president, who I think is a pretty great guy.
Let's talk about what the president has characterized as the issue, and he keeps coming back to it. It's Homeland Security, the war against terror, but Osama bin Laden is still running around free. The Taliban is rearming in Afghanistan. We're mired in a civil war pinned down in Iraq, and North Korea is setting off nuclear weapons. So what has Washington done for us lately to make us safer?
You're obviously characterizing that a little bit.
Well, those are four.
Yeah. The fact is, it's now 5 years since 2001, since 9/11. And we haven't had a single attack on American soil against Americans. We lost 3,000 people and nothing since then. And now, this war on terror is a complex thing. I'm not going to say, and the president wouldn't say, that it's not complex. But it's one we have to continue fighting and improving the way we fight it as we go. I mean, I was sitting with a Special Forces retired general, and he was angry about Iraq and talking about all the horrible, wrong things that were happening there. And he stopped and said, and the only thing worse than what we're doing in Iraq is if we pulled out. And of course, that's the case. We can't pull out. We have to learn how to win this war. And we're doing a pretty good job here in America. We have allies that are now galvanized because they've had problems in many of their countries and are focusing their energies with us. The fact is, we're doing well in America on this war, and we have to see it through.
What's your view on the war, Mr. Burridge?
Well, you know, I grew up in a military family. My dad was a command sergeant major in the Utah National Guard. I practically grew up at Camp Williams. I lived in the barracks out there when I was a kid. And I've gone out there and I've talked to the soldiers and I've talked to them about the war. And the worst thing that you can do to a soldier is give them a mission and then don't back them and give them the opportunity to do that. And the civilian leadership of this war, especially in the Pentagon, there's been turf battles, there's been games being played by people in Washington and setting forth agendas that aren't necessarily good for our troops. Donald Rumsfeld, there's a new book called Cobra 2. It talks about his agenda from the very beginning was to try to get the fewest troops on the ground in Iraq. And we can see that policy has been a failure. I'm an advocate of the PAL doctrine, which means if you're going to go into a country, you need to use overwhelming force and have a clear exit strategy. It's quite clear that what this administration does, and the partisans in power at this time, they've politicized this war way too much, and they've left our soldiers at risk. Meanwhile, when our veterans come home, they don't fund their health care, and they don't give them the adequate things that they need. I'm an advocate for veterans. My mother lives on a veteran's pension. I think that we need to go and support our troops, and we need to have a clear strategy to secure the area, which probably means it's going to break down into 3 different regions. Right now, it's very clear there's a civil war between the Sunnis and the Shias, and the Kurds want their own sovereignty. But at the same time, if we do that, we can get some type of shared power coalition. But this administration and this civilian leadership has had their chance, and quite frankly, they've failed. And it's time for a new civilian leadership in the
Iraq.
In the government, here in the United States.
United States
Pentagon.
government.
That's right.